There is a moment many women experience that is difficult to explain to others. It does not look like crisis from the outside. Life may appear stable. Responsibilities are being met. Roles are being fulfilled. And yet, internally, something feels disoriented. A quiet loss of direction. A sense of disconnection from what once felt meaningful. A feeling of standing in between versions of self. Jung did not see this state as failure. He saw it as preparation. In Jungian psychology, feeling loss is often not a sign of regression, but a sign that an old inner structure can no longer hold what the woman is becoming. For many women, identity is built early around adaptation, being attuned, being responsible, being emotionally available, being what is needed. This adaptation is not weakness. It is intelligence. But over time, what begins as sensitivity can turn into self-abandonment. The psyche notices this long before the conscious mind does. And when the gap between who a woman is and who she has learned to be becomes too wide, the psyche initiates disorientation, not to punish her, but to interrupt what no longer serves growth. Jung believed that the psyche cannot transform while it is too comfortable, so it removes clarity first. Direction dissolves. Motivation weakens. Certainty fades. This is the beginning of individuation. For women, this phase often feels especially unsettling because it collides with conditioning. Women are often taught to maintain coherence for others, to remain emotionally stable, to know what they want. So when clarity disappears, shame often follows. What is wrong with me? Why can't I figure this out? I should be grateful. But Jung would say, this confusion is not pathology. It is a threshold. The old identity has reached its limit, and the psyche refuses to build a future on outdated foundations. Before a woman finds herself, she must lose a version of herself that was shaped by expectation rather than truth. This loss is rarely dramatic. It is subtle. She feels tired of explaining herself, tired of maintaining emotional balance for others, tired of being the one who understands. What disappears first is enthusiasm, then direction. Then the sense of who I am begins to blur. This is not emptiness. It is space. Jung described this stage as a necessary void, a psychological pause where the ego loosens its grip, allowing unconscious material to rise. For women, this material often includes anger that was never expressed, desire that was postponed, needs that were minimized. These contents cannot emerge while the old identity remains intact. So the psyche destabilizes it. Feeling lost is the psyche saying, this structure is complete. A new one must form. But the formation takes time. And during that time, uncertainty becomes a dominant experience. Women often interpret this as weakness. In reality, it is strength in transition. The psyche is reorganizing itself around authenticity rather than adaptation. This is why external advice often feels useless during this phase. Just do what makes you happy. Be positive. Have you tried changing your routine? These suggestions miss the point. The psyche is not asking for solutions. It is asking for permission to dissolve what is no longer true. Jung emphasized that transformation is preceded by disorientation. Before clarity returns, meaning must be redefined. And for women, meaning is often deeply tied to relationship. Who am I if I stop overgiving? Who am I if I stop being the emotional center? Who am I if I choose myself without apology? These questions cannot be answered immediately. They must be lived into. This is why the loss phase feels slow. There is no clear map, only internal signals. Fatigue where obligation once lived. Restlessness where compliance once felt safe. Silence where explanation once flowed easily. The psyche is withdrawing energy from roles that no longer align. And this withdrawal feels like loss. But it is actually conservation. Energy is being reclaimed for something new. Jung believed that women often reach this phase after long periods of emotional competence. They have managed, adapted, sustained. And then, quietly, something inside says, this is not enough anymore. Not because life is wrong, but because the self is expanding. One of the most difficult things for a woman to accept during this phase is that nothing is wrong with her. The mind searches desperately for explanations. a diagnosis, a cause, a mistake. But the psyche is not malfunctioning. It is recalibrating. Jung understood that the ego, the conscious identity a woman has learned to inhabit, is often built for survival long before it is built for truth. Many women learn early that love is conditional, that harmony must be maintained, that being emotionally perceptive means being responsible for others' emotional states. This forms an identity that is capable, strong, and adaptive, but it also forms an identity that is constantly oriented outward. The lost feeling appears when this outward orientation reaches exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion alone, but existential fatigue. The woman begins to feel disconnected from her own inner signals. She may still function well. Others may still rely on her, but internally, she no longer feels anchored. Jung would say that this is the psyche withdrawing libido, psychic energy from the external world, and turning it inward. This inward turn is not comfortable. It feels like confusion because the inner world has not yet been mapped. For years, meaning came from being needed, from being competent, from being emotionally available. Now those sources no longer nourish her, and nothing has replaced them yet. This is the void. Western culture often fears the void. It rushes to fill it with activity, productivity, explanation. But Jung saw the void as sacred. It is the womb of transformation. For women especially, this void can feel threatening because it contradicts cultural expectations. Women are often expected to know who they are, to be emotionally fluent, to be stable. So when instability arises, it is often internalized as failure. But psychologically, instability is movement. The psyche destabilizes what has become too rigid. This phase often coincides with moments when a woman stops tolerating certain dynamics. She may suddenly feel irritated by things she once accepted easily. She may withdraw from conversations that feel draining. She may lose interest in explaining herself. This is not bitterness. It is discernment emerging. Jung believed that growth often begins with irritation. Irritation is the psyche's signal that a boundary has been crossed repeatedly. When boundaries have been ignored long enough, the psyche responds by removing emotional availability. The woman may feel numb in places where she once felt empathy. This numbness is not coldness. It is protection. The psyche is conserving energy for reconstruction. During this phase, many women feel alone even when surrounded by people. This loneliness is different from isolation. It is not about lacking connection. It is about lacking resonance. The old connections no longer mirror who she is becoming, and the new ones have not yet appeared. Jung described this as being between worlds. No longer who you were, not yet who you are becoming. This in-between state is psychologically uncomfortable because identity depends on continuity. When continuity breaks, anxiety appears. But anxiety here is not fear of danger. It is fear of the unknown self. The psyche is asking the woman to meet herself without roles, without performance, without justification, just presence. This is why many women in this phase feel drawn to solitude, silence, or introspection, not because they want to disappear, but because noise interferes with inner listening. Jung emphasized that individuation, the process of becoming oneself, requires separation from collective expectations. For women, this separation can feel like betrayal of family roles, betrayal of relational identities, betrayal of a nice, strong, or understanding self. But individuation is not rejection of others. It is inclusion of the self. The lost feeling intensifies when a woman tries to return to old roles, out of guilt or obligation. The psyche resists. She may feel heavier, more tired, less alive. This resistance is not laziness. It is psychological refusal. The psyche will not allow her to rebuild meaning on structures that no longer align. Jung believed that when the psyche refuses, it is protecting the future self. This is why forcing clarity does not work. Making lists, setting goals, seeking external validation. These actions often increase confusion because the psyche is not asking for direction. It is asking for honesty. What feels false now? What feels obligatory rather than chosen? Where is energy leaking? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. As this questioning deepens, many women experience grief, not always tied to specific loss, but grief for years spent adapting, for desires postponed, for parts of themselves that were silenced. Jung believed that grief is an essential component of transformation. You cannot become whole without mourning what you were forced to abandon. This grief does not mean life was wasted. It means awareness has matured, and with maturity comes accountability to oneself. The loss phase often softens once a woman stops trying to escape it, when she allows confusion without self-judgment, when she allows fatigue without self-criticism, when she allows silence without explanation. This permission creates space, and in that space, something subtle begins to form. Not answers, signals, small preferences, quiet impulses, gentle boundaries. The psyche does not rebuild identity dramatically. It rebuilds organically. Jung warned against premature certainty. Certainty too early is often defense. True clarity arrives slowly, through lived alignment. As the woman honors small internal truths, the lost feeling begins to shift. It does not disappear overnight, but it changes texture, from panic to curiosity, from confusion to openness, from emptiness to potential. This is a turning point, not the end of being lost, but the beginning of being found from the inside out. As the process unfolds, the woman often begins to notice a strange contradiction within herself. Externally, she may appear composed. Internally, she feels unstructured. This gap between appearance and experience creates tension. Jung understood this tension as a necessary conflict between the persona and the emerging self. The persona is the version of the self that learned how to survive, how to be accepted, how to belong. For many women, the persona is polished early. It learns emotional intelligence before it learns self-protection. It learns empathy before it learns boundaries. It learns responsibility before it learns desire. Over time, this persona becomes efficient, but rigid, and when the inner self begins to outgrow it, confusion arises. The woman may ask herself, why do I feel disconnected when everything looks fine? Why am I no longer motivated by things that once defined me? Jung would say, because the persona has fulfilled its function, and now it must loosen. This loosening feels like disorientation, because the persona provided structure. Without it, the woman enters a psychological wilderness. But this wilderness is not empty. It is alive. It contains instincts that were suppressed, preferences that were postponed, truths that were softened for harmony. At first, these instincts feel unfamiliar. The woman may doubt them. She may think she is becoming selfish, colder, or less loving. But Jung emphasized that individuation often looks like selfishness from the outside because it redirects energy inward. This redirection is essential. Without it, the psyche remains fragmented. As the woman allows herself to feel loss without rushing to correct it, her inner compass begins to recalibrate, not through logic, but through sensation. She starts noticing what drains her, what tightens her body, what creates resistance. These signals were always present, but now they are louder because the psyche is prioritizing self-alignment. Many women experience guilt during this phase. Guilt for disappointing others. Guilt for withdrawing. Guilt for no longer being endlessly available. Jung viewed guilt as a byproduct of internal conflict, not moral failure, but psychological realignment. The guilt does not mean she is doing something wrong. It means she is breaking an unconscious contract, a contract that once ensured belonging, but now restricts growth. Breaking this contract feels destabilizing. The psyche is renegotiating identity. This renegotiation often triggers fear. Fear of losing connection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of becoming alone. Jung acknowledged that individuation is inherently lonely at times, not because others abandon you, but because you are no longer fully defined by collective roles. This loneliness is transitional. It marks the separation between adaptation and authenticity. As a woman sits with this loneliness rather than fleeing it, something unexpected begins to happen. She starts to feel a different kind of presence within herself. quieter, more grounded, less reactive. This presence does not demand explanation. It simply is. Jung would describe this as the emergence of the self, the organizing center of the psyche beyond the ego. The self does not shout. It guides through subtle alignment. The lost feeling begins to soften. When the woman stops asking, "Who should I be now?" and starts asking, "What feels true in this moment?" This shift changes everything. Because truth does not require certainty. It requires honesty. The psyche responds quickly to honesty. Even small acts of self-trust create movement. Saying no without justification. Leaving situations that feel misaligned. Allowing silence without filling it. These acts do not solve confusion. They stabilize it. And stability allows clarity to grow naturally. Jung warned that clarity forced too early creates another false identity. True clarity arrives when the psyche feels safe enough to reveal itself gradually. This safety is internal. It comes from self-permission. Permission to not know. Permission to change. Permission to disappoint. As this permission deepens, the lost feeling transforms again. It becomes spacious rather than chaotic. The woman may still not know where she is going, but she begins to trust that movement is happening. This trust is crucial. It replaces urgency with patience. And patience allows the psyche to complete its work. The woman is no longer trying to fix herself. She is allowing herself to form. And formation takes time, not because she is slow, but because what is emerging is real. As this inner formation continues, the woman often encounters a part of herself that has been quietly waiting for years. Jung called this encounter the confrontation with the shadow. For women, the shadow is rarely made of cruelty or immorality. More often, it is made of unlived truth, unexpressed anger, suppressed ambition, desire that was judged as too much, needs that were labeled inconvenient. These qualities did not disappear. They went underground. And now, during this lost phase, they begin to surface. This surfacing can be uncomfortable. The woman may feel emotions that do not match her self-image. She may feel irritation where she once felt patience, firmness where she once felt softness, distance where she once felt closeness. Jung emphasized that the shadow always appears first as disturbance. It disrupts the image the ego has of itself. This is why many women feel fear during this phase, not of external danger, but of internal change. Who am I becoming? What if I don't recognize myself anymore? But the shadow does not destroy identity. It completes it. The parts emerging now are not new. They are reclaimed. The psyche is saying, you cannot become whole without what you left behind. This is especially significant for women because social conditioning often rewards self-sacrifice. Many women learn that harmony is more important than truth, that being agreeable is safer than being authentic, that emotional labor is proof of worth. Over time, this creates a split. The woman becomes skilled at reading others, but disconnected from herself. The lost feeling appears when this split becomes unsustainable. The psyche demands reunification. Shadow integration does not mean acting out every impulse. Jung was clear about this. Integration means recognition, naming what exists without judgment. A woman who acknowledges her anger becomes less destructive, not more. A woman who acknowledges her desire becomes more grounded, not reckless. What is unconscious controls behavior. What is conscious becomes choice. This is why the lost phase often includes emotional volatility. The psyche is bringing buried material into awareness. Without awareness, it erupts. With awareness, it reorganizes. Many women try to suppress this volatility because it feels unsafe, but suppression prolongs confusion. Jung believed that the psyche heals by expression followed by reflection. Feeling alone is not enough. Feeling understood by oneself is required. As the woman allows shadow emotions to be felt, without acting them out impulsively, she begins to reclaim inner authority. Authority not over others, but over her own experience. This authority is quiet. It shows up as certainty about what she will no longer tolerate, as clarity about what drains her, as a refusal to explain herself excessively. This does not make her cold. It makes her coherent. Coherence is the psyche aligning internally. During this time, intuition often becomes stronger, but intuition can be confusing if the woman has learned to distrust her inner voice. She may mistake intuition for fear, or fear for intuition. Jung emphasized that intuition matures through experience, not perfection. The lost phase trains intuition. By removing external structure, the psyche forces a woman to listen inwardly. At first, this listening feels chaotic. Signals conflict. Desires contradict. Emotions fluctuate. This is normal. The psyche is sorting. Over time, patterns emerge. Certain situations consistently feel heavy. Others feel expansive. The woman learns to trust these sensations. This trust does not come from confidence. It comes from repetition. Jung believed that the unconscious educates the conscious mind through repetition. Each time the woman honors an inner signal, integration strengthens. Each time she overrides out of guilt or fear, confusion returns. This feedback loop is not punishment. It is guidance. As this learning deepens, the woman begins to grieve again, but differently. This grief is not about the past alone. It is about the future she will no longer pursue. The version of life that required her to shrink. The roles that demanded constant emotional output. The relationships built on imbalance. Letting go of these imagined futures is painful, but it is also liberating. Jung saw grief as the psyche releasing attachment to outdated symbols. Once released, energy becomes available. This energy does not rush outward. It consolidates inward. The woman may feel calmer, but less driven, less reactive, but more deliberate. Externally, this can look like stagnation. Internally, it is stabilization. This is a crucial stage. Many women abandon the process here because it lacks validation. Nothing dramatic is happening. No clear achievement marks progress. But psychologically, this is where identity solidifies. The psyche is laying foundations. Foundations do not feel exciting. They feel quiet. Jung warned that seeking excitement during this phase often leads back to old patterns. The psyche is asking for patience, not stimulation. As patience grows, the woman begins to experience a subtle shift. She no longer feels completely lost. She feels unlocated but grounded. This distinction matters. Lost feels panicked. Unlocated feels open. She may not know where she is going, but she trusts where she is standing. This trust changes how she moves through the world. She speaks less, observes more, chooses carefully. This is not withdrawal. It is discernment, and discernment is the mature expression of intuition. The psyche has not yet finished revealing itself, but it is no longer chaotic. It is assembling. As this inner consolidation continues, the woman begins to notice that her relationship to others is quietly changing, not because she has decided to change it, but because her internal orientation has shifted. Jung understood that relationships are never only between two people. They are also encounters between inner worlds. When a woman is organized around adaptation, her relationships revolve around maintenance, maintaining harmony, maintaining emotional equilibrium, maintaining connection, even at personal cost. As the psyche reorganizes around authenticity, this maintenance becomes unsustainable. The woman may feel less inclined to rescue, reassure, or absorb others' emotions, not out of indifference, but out of self-respect. This shift often surprises her. She may think, I used to care more. I used to be more patient. But Jung would say, she used to be more self-abandoning. Care that erases the self is not care. It is compensation. During the loss phase, compensation collapses. The psyche removes the excess emotional labor that once kept imbalance hidden. As a result, some relationships begin to feel strained. People who unconsciously relied on her emotional availability may react with confusion or resistance. They may say she has changed, that she is distant, that she is no longer the same. And they are right. But what they often mean is, you no longer function the way you used to for me. This can trigger guilt. Many women feel responsible for others' discomfort. Jung saw this as a key obstacle in individuation. The fear of causing discomfort keeps the psyche bound to old roles. But discomfort is not harm. It is adjustment. As the woman tolerates others' discomfort without rushing to fix it, her internal stability increases. This tolerance is difficult. It challenges deep conditioning, but it is necessary because individuation requires differentiation. The woman is learning where she ends and others begin. This boundary is not rigid. It is alive. It responds to alignment rather than obligation. As boundaries clarify, the woman may feel a strange emptiness, not loneliness, but space. Where emotional noise once lived, there is now quiet. At first, this quiet feels unsettling. The psyche is used to stimulation. Drama, urgency, and emotional intensity once provided orientation. Without them, the woman may feel unanchored again. This is another subtle layer of being lost. But this time it is different. The loss is not of identity, but of distraction. Jung believed that many people confuse intensity with meaning. For women who have lived emotionally engaged lives, this confusion can be strong. When intensity fades, they may wonder if something is missing. But what is missing is not meaning. It is compulsion. The psyche is learning how to exist without constant emotional activation. This is maturation. As this maturation deepens, the woman's inner dialogue begins to change. She becomes less self-critical, less apologetic internally, more curious than judgmental. This shift is subtle but profound. It marks the emergence of self-trust, not confidence in outcomes, but trust in perception. Jung believed that psychological health is not about certainty, but about resilience in uncertainty. The loss phase builds this resilience. Each time the woman sits with not knowing, without abandoning herself, her psyche strengthens. She is no longer trying to return to who she was. She is allowing who she is to arrive. This arrival is gradual. It does not announce itself, but signs appear. She no longer explains her choices excessively. She no longer seeks reassurance for decisions that feel right. She no longer needs to be understood by everyone. Understanding becomes internal. This internal validation changes how she moves through the world. She becomes selective with her energy, intentional with her time, honest about her limits. These changes may feel uncomfortable at first, but they are stabilizing. The psyche is aligning behavior with truth. As alignment increases, the lost feeling continues to transform. It becomes less about confusion and more about openness. The woman may feel a quiet excitement, not about specific plans, but about possibility. Possibility grounded in self-knowledge. Jung described this stage as a psyche turning toward the future, without abandoning the past. The woman carries her experiences with her, but they no longer define her. They inform her. This distinction is critical. Defining limits growth. Informing supports it. As this distinction becomes embodied, the woman's sense of self stabilizes further. She is not rigid. She is rooted. Rootedness does not require certainty. It requires connection to inner truth. And inner truth is not static. It evolves. This is why the lost phase cannot be rushed. Rushing freezes truth into concept. Allowing lets it live. The woman who allows herself to be lost, long enough to listen, emerges not with answers, but with orientation. Orientation is quieter than answers, but more reliable. It does not tell her exactly where to go. It tells her when something is wrong. And that is enough. For now, as this orientation strengthens, the woman begins to experience a subtle but decisive shift in how she relates to intimacy. Not only romantic intimacy, but emotional closeness in all forms. Jung understood intimacy as a mirror of inner relationship. When a woman has been disconnected from herself, intimacy often involves overexposure, too much sharing, too much explaining, too much emotional availability too quickly. This overexposure is not openness. It is an unconscious attempt to be seen before being grounded. During the lost phase, this pattern starts to feel uncomfortable. The woman may notice that she no longer wants to reveal everything. She no longer wants to be immediately understood. She no longer wants to emerge emotionally to feel secure. This is not withdrawal. It is containment. Containment is the psyche's ability to hold experience internally, without needing external confirmation. Jung saw containment as a sign of psychological maturity. The woman begins to feel that some parts of her do not need to be shared immediately or at all. They are hers. This realization often brings relief and also grief, because for many women, closeness was built through emotional transparency. If she stops oversharing, who is she in relationship now? This question can create anxiety. But the psyche is not removing intimacy. It is redefining it. Intimacy becomes selective rather than indiscriminate. Depth replaces intensity. The woman learns that connection does not require self-exposure at the cost of self-protection. This learning often coincides with a loss of tolerance for superficial interaction. Small talk feels draining. Performative positivity feels hollow. Relationships based on emotional imbalance feel heavy. The woman may feel that she no longer fits in certain social spaces. Jung would say she is outgrowing collective identification. Collective identity provides belonging, but it limits individuation. As the psyche individuates, the woman feels less comfortable in environments that require masking. This discomfort can feel like social alienation, but psychologically it is alignment. She is no longer willing to fragment herself to belong. This often leads to periods of solitude, not loneliness, but chosen quiet. The psyche uses solitude to consolidate change. Without constant relational input, the woman can hear herself clearly. At first, the solitude may feel empty, but gradually it becomes nourishing. She discovers that her presence is enough. This is a radical shift. For women conditioned to define themselves relationally, self-sufficiency can feel unfamiliar. But Jung emphasized that individuation does not eliminate relationship. It transforms it. Only a self that can stand alone can enter relationship without losing itself. As the woman becomes more rooted internally, her standards for connection change. She no longer seeks intensity as proof of depth. She no longer confuses chemistry with compatibility. She no longer tolerates ambiguity that erodes self-respect. This clarity does not make her rigid. It makes her discerning. Discerning women are often misunderstood. They may be labeled picky, distant, or difficult, but Jung would say they are psychologically integrated. They know what resonates and what does not. This knowing is not intellectual. It is embodied. The body becomes a guide. Tension signals misalignment. Ease signals truth. The woman learns to trust these sensations. This trust further reduces the lost feeling. She may still not have a clear future vision, but she has internal coherence. And coherence is more valuable than certainty. As coherence deepens, the psyche begins to express itself creatively, not necessarily through art, but through life choices. The woman may change how she works, how she rests, how she engages. These changes may look small externally. Internally, they are profound. She is no longer acting against herself. Jung believed that neurosis arises when the psyche is forced to live a life it cannot support. As alignment increases, tension decreases. Not all tension disappears, but the tension becomes meaningful rather than draining. The lost phase, once feared, now reveals itself as initiation, an initiation into a more truthful self. Initiations are not comfortable. They strip away illusions, but they confer strength. The woman who passes through this phase is not louder, not harder, not more armored. She is clearer. Clarity changes everything. It changes how she listens, how she chooses, how she loves. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the question shifts from, why do I feel so lost? To, I know when something is not right. This knowing is a foundation. The rest will build on it. As the woman settles more fully into this inner coherence, something important begins to happen in how she experiences time. Jung observed that when the psyche is fragmented, time feels urgent. There is pressure to decide, pressure to resolve, pressure to arrive somewhere quickly. But when integration begins, urgency softens. The woman may notice that she no longer feels rushed in the same way. Deadlines still exist. Responsibilities remain, but internally there is less panic. This change can feel unsettling at first. She may wonder if she is losing ambition, losing drive, losing momentum. But what she is losing is compulsion. Compulsion is action driven by fear of inadequacy or abandonment. Alignment is action driven by inner consent. Jung believed that much of what society calls motivation is actually anxiety in disguise. When anxiety diminishes, motivation reorganizes. The woman does not stop moving forward. She simply stops forcing herself in directions that feel false. This is why, during this phase, productivity may fluctuate. Some days feel quiet and inward. Other days bring sudden clarity and decisive action. This rhythm is not dysfunction. It is organic regulation. The psyche is learning its own tempo. For women who have spent years overriding their internal rhythm to meet external demands, this recalibration can feel like losing control. But control was never the same as stability. Stability comes from attunement. As a woman becomes more attuned, she may also notice changes in her emotional responses. Things that once provoked strong reactions now feel distant, not because she has become indifferent, but because she is less personally entangled. Jung described this as the ego no longer being identified with every psychic content. The woman can observe emotion without being consumed by it. This capacity is one of the clearest signs of integration. She still feels deeply, but she is no longer flooded. Depth remains. Overwhelm fades. This shift is especially important for women because emotional intensity is often mistaken for emotional authenticity. But authenticity does not require suffering. It requires honesty. As honesty increases, emotional life becomes clearer. The woman begins to recognize patterns without dramatizing them. She sees when she is tired rather than broken, when she is disappointed rather than rejected, when she needs rest rather than explanation. This clarity reduces self-blame. Jung believed that self-blame is a substitute for understanding. When understanding arrives, blame dissolves. Another subtle change occurs in how the woman relates to her past. Memories that once carried emotional charge begin to feel neutral, not erased, but integrated. She may recall moments of loss, heartbreak, or compromise without tightening in her body. This does not mean the past no longer matters. It means it no longer governs the present. The psyche has metabolized the experience. Jung emphasized that what is not integrated returns as fate. What is integrated becomes wisdom. The loss phase is where this integration happens, not through analysis alone, but through lived emotional digestion. As this digestion continues, the woman may feel less interested in explaining her journey to others, not because she is secretive, but because explanation feels inadequate. Language cannot fully capture inner transformation, and she no longer needs others to validate it. This independence from validation is another sign of psychic consolidation. The woman is no longer constructing herself through reflection in others' eyes. She is experiencing herself directly. This direct experience creates a new kind of confidence, not performative, not assertive, but grounded. Grounded confidence does not announce itself. It is felt. Others may notice that she seems calmer, more present, less reactive. They may not know why conversations with her feel different, but they do. Presence is contagious. Jung believed that individuals who are inwardly aligned create a stabilizing effect on their environment, not by controlling others, but by no longer being pulled into unnecessary conflict. As the woman embodies this presence, she may also encounter resistance. Some people prefer her old self, the accommodating self, the emotionally available self, the predictable self. Her new orientation disrupts these expectations. This can create tension. Jung warned that individuation often leads to temporary relational friction, but this friction is not loss. It is sorting. Relationships either adapt or reveal their limitations. This sorting process can be painful, but it is also clarifying. The woman learns who can meet her where she is and who can only relate to who she used to be. This discernment further stabilizes her sense of self. She is no longer defined by proximity. She is defined by alignment. As alignment deepens, the question of who am I loses urgency, not because it has been answered conceptually, but because it has been answered experientially. She is living the answer, moment by moment, choice by choice. The lost phase, once characterized by confusion, now feels like openness without fear. She may not have a rigid identity, but she has an inner axis. This axis does not dictate outcomes. It guides orientation, and orientation is enough. For now, as this inner axis stabilizes, the woman begins to realize something subtle but decisive. Her sense of worth is no longer negotiated. Jung understood self-worth not as confidence, but as psychic rootedness. When a woman is fragmented internally, worth is often sought externally, through achievement, through being chosen, through being indispensable, through being admired or needed. During the loss phase, these sources of worth quietly collapse, not all at once, but enough to create unease. Compliments feel hollow, achievements feel strangely empty. Approval no longer brings relief. This can be frightening. The woman may ask herself, if these things no longer define me, what does? But this question is premature. Jung warned that when old value systems dissolve, the psyche enters a value-free interval, an interval where worth is not yet redefined. This interval feels like emptiness, but it is actually neutrality. The psyche is removing borrowed standards, so that intrinsic value can emerge. Intrinsic value does not announce itself loudly. It feels like quiet self-respect. The woman notices she no longer betrays herself in small ways. She no longer laughs at things that hurt her. She no longer minimizes her discomfort to keep peace. She no longer chases what destabilizes her. These are not dramatic changes, but they are foundational. Jung believed that neurosis often begins with small, repeated self-betrayals. Healing begins when those betrayals stop. This stopping does not require confrontation. It requires recognition. As recognition deepens, the woman's relationship to suffering begins to change. She still experiences pain. Loss still hurts. Disappointment still arrives. But suffering no longer defines her identity. She does not build meaning around endurance alone. This is an important shift for women, because endurance is often praised. Women are taught to be strong by surviving. But Jung would say, survival is not the same as wholeness. Wholeness includes joy, desire, rest, and refusal. As the woman integrates this, she becomes less impressed by narratives that glorify struggle. She is no longer interested in proving resilience. She is interested in living truthfully. This changes how she defines success. Success is no longer about constant expansion, or visibility, or validation. Success becomes internal congruence. Does this choice cost me my peace? Does this path require me to fragment myself again? Does this role align with who I am now? These questions guide her decisions. They slow her down. But slowing down is not regression. It is refinement. Jung believed that maturity involves reducing unnecessary complexity. The woman begins to simplify her life, not outwardly at first, but inwardly. She stops carrying what is not hers. She stops solving emotions that do not belong to her. She stops assuming responsibility for outcomes beyond her control. This simplification creates emotional space, and in that space, something long dormant begins to surface. Desire, not desire shaped by lack or fantasy, but desire rooted in self-knowledge. What she wants now feels different, less urgent, less dramatic, more specific. She may want fewer things, but want them more honestly. Jung believed that true desire emerges only after projection has been withdrawn. When a woman stops projecting her unlived life onto others, she begins to want directly. This direct wanting is calm. It does not chase. It does not beg. It does not bargain. It simply recognizes. This recognition further stabilizes her inner world. She trusts herself not because she is always right, but because she listens. Listening becomes her primary orientation. Listening to her body. Listening to her energy. Listening to her internal resistance. Resistance is no longer something to overcome. It is information. Jung emphasized that the psyche speaks first through resistance. When something is wrong, the psyche withdraws energy. The woman learns to respect this withdrawal. She stops forcing enthusiasm, stops pretending alignment, stops pushing herself into spaces that drain her. This respect deepens self-trust, and self-trust changes how fear operates. Fear no longer dictates decisions. It informs them. The woman may still feel fear, but she does not collapse into it. She recognizes fear as a signal, not a command. This distinction is crucial. It marks the transition from reactive living to conscious participation. At this stage, the lost feeling is almost fully transformed. What remains is not confusion, but openness, an openness that is no longer destabilizing. It feels like standing on solid ground. While looking into an unknown landscape, there is no panic, only awareness. Jung would say this is the ego aligned with the self, not dissolved, not inflated, but oriented. The woman does not yet know everything she will become, but she no longer doubts that becoming is underway, and that certainty, quiet, embodied, unannounced, is the true opposite of being lost. As this inner orientation becomes more stable, the woman begins to notice that her relationship with her own story is changing. Jung observed that most people live inside their story rather than with it. The story explains who they are, why they act the way they do, what they expect from life. For a long time, this story provides coherence. But during individuation, the story begins to loosen. The woman may realize that the narrative she has been telling herself about her past, her sacrifices, her resilience, her disappointments, no longer fully fits, not because it was false, but because it is incomplete. Jung believed that identity matures when a person can step back from their own narrative, when experiences stop being proof of who you are and become information about how you lived. This shift is subtle but powerful. The woman no longer defines herself primarily by what happened to her. She carries her history, but she is not imprisoned by it. This is especially meaningful for women, whose identities are often shaped by relational experiences, who she loved, who left, who depended on her, who disappointed her. These experiences once structured her sense of self. Now they reorganize. They become chapters, not the book. This reorganization can feel disorienting at first. If she is no longer the one who endured, or the one who gave, or the one who held everything together, then who is she? Jung would say, she is becoming someone who no longer needs identity to be built from survival. This is a major psychological transition. Survival-based identity is reactive. It is forged under pressure. Authentic identity is responsive. It emerges from alignment. As the woman releases survival identity, she may feel strangely undefined again. But this undefined state is different from earlier confusion. It is not desperate. It is open. The psyche is no longer dismantling old structures. It is refining new ones. Refinement is quieter than collapse. During this stage, the woman often becomes more selective with language. She speaks less about herself, not because she is hiding, but because she no longer needs to narrate her existence. Words become precise. She stops over-explaining emotions, stops defending choices that feel right, stops translating herself for others' comfort. Jung believed that excessive explanation often signals inner doubt. As doubt dissolves, speech simplifies. This simplicity is not emptiness. It is confidence without performance. Others may notice that she feels more present, not more entertaining, not more impressive, but more there. Presence is a natural byproduct of inner coherence. The psyche no longer splits attention between who one is and who one thinks one should be. This unified attention changes how life is experienced. Moments feel fuller. Decisions feel cleaner. Regret loses its grip. Regret depends on identification with an outdated self. When identity updates, regret softens into understanding. Jung emphasized that understanding is the antidote to self-reproach. The woman begins to see why she stayed, why she tried, why she adapted, not with judgment, but with compassion. This compassion is not sentimental. It is sober. She recognizes that she did the best she could with the consciousness that she had at the time. And now, consciousness is expanded. Expansion does not require renouncing the past. It requires contextualizing it. As contextualization deepens, the woman's emotional landscape becomes less extreme. High highs and low lows even out, not into dullness, but into steadiness. Steadiness allows depth without chaos. Jung saw this as emotional maturity, feeling fully without being destabilized. This maturity changes how she engages with uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like threat. It feels like openness. The woman understands that not knowing does not mean being unprepared. It means being receptive. Receptivity is not passivity. It is readiness without rigidity. As this readiness settles, the psyche begins to orient toward future expression, not ambition-driven, not fear-driven, but value-driven. What matters now feels different. The woman may feel less interested in proving herself and more interested in inhabiting herself. This inhabitation is quiet. It does not seek applause. It seeks congruence. Jung believed that the self expresses itself not through dramatic declarations, but through consistent alignment over time. The woman begins to live in a way that requires less internal negotiation. Choices feel simpler, not because options are fewer, but because misaligned options are easier to recognize. This ease is the true sign that the loss phase has completed its work, not because everything is known, but because inner conflict has reduced. The psyche is no longer divided against itself, and from this place, life begins to move forward again, not urgently, not anxiously, but deliberately. The woman does not rush to define the future. She trusts that clarity will emerge through participation. This trust is not blind. It is earned through listening, through patience, through the courage to remain lost long enough for truth to form. As this inner alignment stabilizes further, something almost paradoxical occurs. The woman stops thinking about herself as much, not because she has disappeared, but because she no longer needs constant self-reference. Jung observed that excessive self-focus is often a symptom of inner fragmentation. When the psyche is divided, attention turns inward compulsively, trying to hold the pieces together. When integration occurs, attention relaxes. The woman becomes less preoccupied with questions like, am I doing this right? Is this who I'm supposed to be now? Am I enough? These questions lose urgency, not because they were answered intellectually, but because they no longer organize her inner life. Her sense of self no longer depends on continuous evaluation. This is a profound shift. She begins to live from herself rather than toward herself. Jung would say the ego has realigned with the self. Not dissolved, not dominated, but in relationship. This relationship feels like quiet guidance rather than command. The woman notices that decisions now arise more naturally. She does not deliberate endlessly. She does not seek as much external input. She does not replay conversations repeatedly. Clarity emerges in the body first. A sense of ease, a sense of resistance, a sense of yes or no without justification. This embodied knowing replaces overthinking, and because it is embodied, it is reliable. At this stage, the woman may reflect back on the period when she felt lost and realize something unexpected. She was never without direction. Direction was simply internal rather than external. The psyche was not removing her path. It was relocating it from outside expectations to inner orientation. Jung emphasized that the self does not provide step-by-step instructions. It provides alignment. When alignment is present, action becomes appropriate without force. This is why, after this phase, life often begins to move again. Opportunities appear. Connections shift. Decisions solidify. Not magically, but coherently. The woman is now visible to herself, and that visibility changes how the world responds. She no longer sends mixed signals. Her energy is clearer. Others may feel this as calm authority, not dominance, not control, but certainty without aggression. This certainty is not rigid. It is flexible because it is rooted As she inhabits this state, the woman also becomes more forgiving of herself and others. But this forgiveness is not permissive. It does not excuse harmful behavior. It simply releases the need to carry unresolved resentment. Jung believed resentment ties psychic energy to the past. Integration frees that energy. Freed energy turns toward life. The woman may feel a renewed interest in simple things. Walking, learning, creating, being present without purpose. These are signs of vitality returning. Vitality does not always look like excitement. Sometimes it looks like peace. At this point, the lost phase is fully transformed, not into certainty, not into a final identity, but into an internal home. The woman feels with herself. This is the key. She is no longer seeking herself. She is accompanying herself. From here, identity continues to evolve, but it does so without crisis. Change no longer threatens coherence. It enriches it. Jung would say that this is a psychological meaning of finding oneself, not discovering a fixed essence, but establishing a living relationship with one's inner truth. The woman does not announce this discovery. There is no dramatic moment, no clear line between before and after. One day, she simply realizes she is no longer trying to return to who she was. She is no longer afraid of who she might become. She is here, and that is enough. And this is how the process truly completes. Not with answers written in stone, not with a final identity to defend, but with an inner quiet that no longer needs to be explained. Carl Jung understood that the psyche does not move in straight lines. It circles, pauses, withdraws, and returns, each time with greater depth. The woman who once felt lost was never broken. She was between versions of herself, between who she learned to be and who she was quietly becoming. What felt like emptiness was actually space. Space for outdated roles to fall away. Space for false obligations to dissolve. Space for a more honest self to emerge. She no longer asks life to confirm her worth. She no longer negotiates her boundaries for belonging. She no longer mistakes endurance for strength. Strength, she now knows, is staying aligned with oneself even when no one is watching. The world may not immediately recognize this transformation. There may be no applause, no clear marker of arrival, but internally, everything has changed. She moves through life with less resistance. She listens more than she explains. She chooses with clarity rather than urgency. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not separation from others, but reunion with the self. And this reunion does not isolate her. It frees her from compulsive patterns, from emotional overextension, from identities built on survival rather than truth. She understands now that being lost was never the opposite of being found. It was the path, a necessary descent, before a more grounded ascent. If this reflection resonated with you, if you recognize your own inner landscape in these words, then this space is meant for you. Subscribe to continue exploring Carl Jung's psychology, the feminine journey of self-realization, and the subtle inner shifts that lead to lasting transformation, because understanding the unconscious is not about escaping life. It is about finally meeting it from a place of wholeness.